Welcome, Bangalore. A very, very warm welcome. We have with us this afternoon, and I'm delighted to interview her. We have Kirtana Kumar. She's an award-winning actor, director, and filmmaker, and now an author. And she's written this fabulous book, Bangalore Blues, which is, how do I describe it? It's racy, it's spacey, it's wild, it's wacky, it's fun, it's beautiful, it's poignant, it's heartbreaking, and it's very, very funny. You know, I used to go out for work and I couldn't wait to come back and read for the evening because her book felt like a really good friend, and it felt like a warm embrace when I came back from work. It was also hilarious. So it was a great pick-me-up in the evening, and most importantly, it left me with a sense of tremendous nostalgia for an old Bangalore of the 70s and the 80s, where both of us grew up in Bangalore, in Jai Mahal, in the 70s and 80s. So Kirtana, tell us about the book. Tell us about the genesis. How did it come about?
Okay. The truth is actually I'm a theatre artist. I'm not a writer. This is my first book. But what happened was very early in the lockdown, 2020, I lost my father. And when I lost my father, I felt like I lost the person who held this repository of Bangalore cantonment histories. And he contained the sort of the maverick stories and the characters. That was number one. Number two is when I was growing up, my introduction to the short story form was really through my father's dog-eared copies of H. Munro, Saki, and O. Henry, these kinds of books. Later, I came into my own understanding of the short story form through the people I loved, Joan Didion and Truman Capote, and then, of course, everybody from the subcontinent, Ismat Chugtai and Manto, most certainly. But I was always left with a feeling of, like, supreme envy. Like, why people are writing city literature and literature about cities like New York and Paris or even Bombay, but I wanted my own literature of Bangalore. And I wanted a literature that was as polyglot as I was, and I was as polyglot as the cantonment Bangalore that I grew up in. So that was another impetus. And finally, it felt like the time. Why did I choose this sort of post-independence, pre-liberalization, very socialist moment in Indian history? I was very interested in that time because I thought the times lent and provided a kind of couch for the development of very maverick characters. And characters who are very diverse, who are polyglot in their language, in their belief, in their religion. And this was facilitated by the way that Bangalore cantonment was. So I thought, okay, this is the story I want to write. It so happened that I was invited to Munich to live there as artist in residence for a few months, and being really far away from my city, Bangalore, gave me I was supposed to be curating a theatre festival there. But in the evenings, I would come back to my snowy, cold tower all alone, and I would type away. Thinking of my father, I would type away. So that's how I arrived at the book. It's just 33 stories, not one more and not one less.
So Kirtana, you sat in Munich and wrote such a fabulous book, which was so real, so immediate. Did the distance from Bangalore help you, or did it hinder you? How do you feel about that?
I think so. I was intrigued by what you told me yesterday in the session on Mumbai Meri Jaan, where she also spoke about being away from the city. And there's something that gives you perspective when you're away from your familiar. And for me, Bangalore is it runs through my veins because for generations we've lived in Bangalore. So it really felt nice to be alone and away and separate and introspect on what this quality of Bangalore was that I enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, and you certainly have captured the spirit of Bangalore, I have to say that. But tell me, why blues? Why Bangalore Blues? Why that title?
So if you don't mind, maybe I'll read you a para from the first story of the book, which is called Dog's Umbrella, and then I'll answer the question about why Bangalore Blues. This name, I don't know how many of you speak Tamil here? Okay, so do all of you know what Naikode is? Okay, so I didn't know this. This was a treat for me when I heard it. So I heard it from a very dear friend of my parents who also passed away. So the first story is called Dog's Umbrella. And I'm just going to read you a bit just to give you the flavor of what this Bangalore was. It was sometime in mid-March, a regular weekday afternoon at Mayo Hall, and this meant that most people were either nodding off in the heat or on the verge of nodding off while chewing the last of that post-lunch beedas and burping with happy abandon. Splatak! Lime and arecanut red and spit flew in different directions like enraged miniature tsunamis, some hitting a wall, most times missing. Sometimes hitting a wall, most times missing. The single ancient temple flower tree that stood in front was in full bloom, all lemon yellow and pink, presiding over the cornices and columns of the old courthouse with good humor and a wink. One advocate snuck out to Blue Diamond to catch a matinee with his girlfriend, secretly hoping to catch some action as well. Let someone else take care of the caseload for a change, he was thinking, with some degree of martyrdom. The lady in the green printed sari seated near the exit was frantically trying to fan herself awake with her pallu. A solitary horsefly, having traveled from Alsur on a tanga, buzzed about hoping to find a mate. Perhaps I should go to Blue Diamond too, it thought. I'm hot for some hanky-panky.
So Kirtana, there are many themes that run through your work. But having had the privilege of knowing you for 35 years, I've noticed that the hypocrisy around sexuality, it has been like at the heart of your work. I remember way back, we worked together on Gohia, which was arousal. And then you made a film called Chandani, and then you made a film called My Children Who Should Be Running Through Vast Open Spaces on Child Sexual Abuse. So sexuality runs through this book as well. The leitmotif is very much there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Okay, so maybe I'll answer both of Munira's questions in one. The first was how I arrived at this name, which was Bangalore Blues. The truth is, it wasn't actually first called Bangalore Blues. So before it went into print, it was called Blue Balls and Groovy Chicks. And then I asked a gentleman, this older friend of ours, WhatsApp, what do you think? Which would you buy in a bookshop? And he said, I'd be scared to pick up Blue Balls and Groovy Chicks. So then I said, all right. But that's the answer to why the name. And just to read you a little bit from the story, which is called Blue Balls and Groovy Chicks. I hope this also answers Munira's second question, which is about hypocrisy surrounding sexuality. Because yes, I don't think it's a motif so much as just my wonder at why there is so much hypocrisy around issues of sexuality. So I don't treat it as a separate, I just treat it in my literature or in my theater or in my films, just as a part of the landscape. So not as something that requires a very special segue and a mask and a kind of tut-tutting about. It's just normal. So here from Blue Balls and Groovy Chicks. I haven't the slightest idea how he got there and how we became best friends. I knew him and what his scene was, which was pretty much the same as all us guys born in those years, circa 1950-ish. Go to college, get the knowledge, stay there till you're through, snog some 15 groovy chicks until your balls are blue. The first line was God's truth, and that last one was the winged hope. Not a chance in hell it would actualize into any semblance of reality unless you were an Iranian guy with a Yazdi, which we were both expressly not. Think Tambram and Mr. Indeterminate instead. Plus, we rode a Luna and a TVS 50 respectively, not exactly the stuff of dreams and aphrodisiacs to those aforementioned groovy cantonment girls in bell-bottoms and whatnot, making their way from Mount Carmel's to Tom's Cafe. Or so one would think, looking at us hanging around Joseph's in our sad trousers with triangles sewn into the legs to turn plain old slacks into cool flares. Anyway, there he was. He was my friend. His name was Money. His nickname was Moneypal because he was supposed to go to Manipal. He had no hopes of any actual money, and he harbored a worthwhile secret. He had lost his virginity to his high school English miss. Miss as in teacher, you dope, not miss as in young girl. It had to remain a secret because should his parents find out, Mr. and Mrs. Srinivasan would march to the school and his poor English miss would get fired and whatnot, and it was the whatnot he always sought to avoid. Therefore it was I, and solely I, who got to hear of his deflowering, And this made our relationship particularly deep.
So shifting gears again, while reading the book, I observed that there were multiple histories that you dealt with. There was the history of the Anglo-Indian community, there was the history of colonialism, there was the history of Bangalore cantonment. So can you tell us, there must have been a process and a method to your madness.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for one thing, I was very keen on sort of feeling like a documentarian of a time. So I wanted to document a certain maverick nature of the cantonment, and I felt that I wanted to write about people whose histories will not get recorded. They will not get recorded because, for one thing, they fall outside of the vernacular. The language they speak is a polyglot language. They don't belong to Sahitya Academy, whatever, Metiye. They don't fall into Sangeet Natak Academy, Metiye. Then who are these people and who cares about them really? And my daughter brought to me this really interesting idea from Frank O'Connell's The Lonely Voice on short story form, this thing about the submerged population. Who are these submerged people? And that really has always fascinated me, the people who no one's going to bother writing about or remembering. And that took me to the archives, of course to Lord Google as well, but to the archives at the Archaeological Survey. I really loved the Gazetteer, so I would get all my factual information from the Gazetteer. And the kind of histories that you find in people's old diaries or in vaults, I don't know if you know, but in the vaults of old banks like SBI, every 100 years or so, stuff is just auctioned. So a friend of mine, KVK Murthy, told me about finding these old love letters in the vaults. So finding histories in love letters, between the yellowing pages of diaries, in old recipes, and who can say all this is not history? The fact that somebody cooked something at one point, why is that not history? So this really interested me. So I arrived at the stories. So if you read the book, you'll notice that the characters are fiction, obviously. So it's not like Jabeen is not me, I promise you. She's not me. But they feel like me. It's a kind of autofiction. But the structure of the book is entirely fact. So everything, the kind of the places, the architectural detail, the trees that were grown, or the way that people occupied themselves in Bangalore pre-liberalization, all of that is very factual. Including, I think that what you're referring to, Munira, could be a story called Churchill's Bill about a fact that all of Bangalore, of course, is very, Susan here for sure knows about it, which is that Churchill, you know this, right, guys? Bangalore Club. That's it. So this little detail kind of interested me, and I was interested also because I work with young people. So I was interested from the perspective, I felt that only a young person would have the gall to write to the descendants of Churchill and say, what the heck? Like, it wouldn't be an older person who thinks this through or feels. It would have to be like somebody like one of my students. So, okay, if you don't, do I have time?
Yes.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll read you a little bit from that. So this is from Churchill's Bill. So this little girl, 14 years old, has kind of told her grandfather, like, what the heck, this is ridiculous, this is awful, how can you bear it, why are you such a tata? She said all of this. And she's dragged him off and filed a PIL and also has drafted a letter. So that's where we are. And oh no, before that, she takes him to Whitefield, she takes him to Waverley. I don't know if you're aware, but Waverley was a house that Winston Churchill frequented. And she goes and hunts over there for proof of his nastiness. The flavor of caraway seeds in the cake always came to mind when they both stood in court all those months later. They had forgotten the dogs and the afternoon light falling through the windows, but they remembered the caraway seeds. It seemed like a cosmic activator, for things moved quickly and unexpectedly forward. Excuse me. That day of tea, cake, and love letters. In the letters, they found all the proof they needed that Churchill, despite whining about Bangalore being a quote-unquote third-rate watering hole, this is true, okay? He really did write this, that Bangalore was nothing but a third-rate watering hole. third-rate watering hole, had actually spent a tidy sum being watered himself in said hole. No doubt he had good reason to whine. He'd had to bounce along in a jhatka from the Whitefield train station to Waverley every time he came by, charged with testosterone, to gaze on Rose's enchanting visage and declare his love. But as per his own account, he paid himself an under-the-table discomfort allowance by consuming copious amounts of wine, and not the free varieties of ginger and grape made by the good women of the English and Anglo-Indian Association, but actual honest-to-God liquor that required paying for from King Edward II's coffers. Then there were the gifts that he plied Rose with: a Victorian porcelain doll, a music box that played Henry Bishop's Home Sweet Home, a pen with her name engraved on it. No, it's all right. So the girl cribs to her grandfather, right? So he goes, all this costs a huge amount of tosh, Aji. It's not like he was sitting on his ass being a pauper. He could jolly well have paid rupees 13. I'm going to track down his living family. I mean, they ought to be ashamed. Pa, why are you club Indians such suck-ups? And that's not a question, Aji. Now please read my letter. It's a first draft. She thrusts it at him. He has no option but to read. Date, October 4th, 1980. Dear dash, dash, and dash. I trust this finds you well, etc. My name is Kamya, and I live in Bangalore, India. I'm 12 years old. A few months ago, it came to my attention that your great-grandfather has an as-yet unpaid bill at the Bangalore Club, previously known as the Bangalore United Services Club on Residency Road, Bangalore. My grandfather, too, is a frequent visitor, though he mainly visits the library to borrow old copies of Tatler, while I gather your ancestor visited the bar where Indians, women, and dogs were not allowed. So he probably felt good sitting there and getting drunk in the company of other Englishmen, but that is not my point. Rather, I would like to draw your attention to the rank stupidity and disgrace of that unpaid bill. For some reason, my fellow men, I think we can agree that women would never have accepted this being good at domestic accounting. To my great shame, seem to think this is not only quite all right, but even seem proud of it. To this end, the Bangalore Club, for reasons best known only to the men who make up the committee members, have waived the bill, as if they've had some sort of royal decree, as if this turns them from slaves to benefactors. When this came to my kind attention, I said to my grandfather, incidentally, a very kind and honest man who never lets a bill go unpaid, this is absurd, and I will not have it. Surely there are descendants of Mr. Winston Churchill who would find this most unseemly, so please attend to this matter the soonest. It's not as if I'm demanding interest. I just think it would do your dignity and self-worth good to pay this bill. Karma, as you may have heard, can be a mean bitch. This last is the truth, not an idle threat. As you can see, your grandfather's unpaid bill is attached. I wonder if anyone's ever bothered sending you his bill in the past. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, remain yours truly, Kamya V.
That was brilliant, Kirtana. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm very quickly going to ask Kirtana one or two questions, and then the floor is open for any burning questions from the audience. So, Kirtana, the cartoons are absolutely apt. Did Paul actually design them for your book or for this presentation?
Oh, I would so love that. But no, absolutely not. Paul, this book, is Paul here? I know he has his session coming up. There he is, way at the back. Please give him a big hand. Because, you know, like, I really feel that Paul is one of those OGs who really recognized the maverick in Bangalore cantonment, and he really documented and observed the character of this. So I'm just so pleased. So no, it just happened that when I started reading them, it felt like this would be a good fit.